I really like to start as the basis for all discussion, and that's what is biodiversity. Often when we talk about biodiversity, many of us actually mean species richness. So we're in that blue column there. And when we mean species richness, we quite often mean native species richness. And that's absolutely okay. But it's really important to be clear when we talk about saving biodiversity and restoring biodiversity, what aspects of that we want to focus on. And that's important. So functional biodiversity, species biodiversity, and genetic biodiversity can all be changed in positive and negative ways by species introductions. Of IUCN red-listed threatened species are found wholly on islands. So although islands make up only 5% of land area and 20% of global terrestrial biodiversity, they make up half of the species on the IUCN red list. So there's something about islands that makes species more likely to be threatened. Invasion and disease is the only threat more likely to be impacting a species on an island. You've actually lost global biodiversity, you've lost global species richness. You've introduced species that are already found somewhere else and lost species that were found nowhere else. What I want to emphasize is the role of biosecurity. Islands provide unique opportunities for biosecurity, and countries that are and island nations that are well versed in practicing biosecurity, as New Zealand has been for 100 years for agricultural protection and more recently conservation. So biosecurity is important not just after you've done an eradication, but it's perhaps most important before future species and threats arrive on your island and create new problems while you're still trying to deal with your previous invasive species problems. So biosecurity here is a pathway process that involves trip preparation at the origin before you or your cargo even depart for your island destination, quarantine when arriving at the island, before going to the island, on the vessel, having pre-border management, so checking what's going on that vessel. So before you even cross the border to your island, you've already done a lot of work at maximising that probability of prevention. And then finally, post-border on the island, you undertake surveillance and be prepared to launch into a contingency response.
So if you take all the landmass of our planet, the terrestrial landmass, it's only about 5% of that is actually islands. Yet despite that low percentage, we see roughly 20% of our 10,000 bird species are on islands. We see about 40% of IUCN red-listed species on islands. And particularly when we look back historically, we can see that invasive mammals have been very, very damaging. And of course, were introduced widely, particularly in the last half millennia. Rats as hitchhikers on ships, goats and cats as deliberate introductions. So it's been estimated that maybe 80% of the world's island groups have had invasive rats introduced to them. And so these places that do not have invasive mammals, these are really special places. So, long story short, islands are special. We know it's a good place to work for conservation, and we know what some of the key drivers are for the trouble that we see. So this map that's in front of you reflects a publicly available database, and the number of dots on this screen I failed to mention. There's probably about 1,500 attempts for which invasive mammal eradications have either been completed or they're being planned. About 50% of these efforts have been on rats so far. The success rate of eradicating invasive mammals is about 89%. And when we look at the trends historically, we can see many things. We can see that the size of the island, the average size of the island, that's increasing. We can see that human inhabited islands are increasingly being tackled. And of course, the minute you involve humans in these places, it becomes more complicated. And we can also see that eradications of multiple species are increasingly being tackled. A threat from an island is a means to an end. We're not there just to do that action. We're there for the outcome. Are we growing more seabirds? Are we growing more reptiles? Are the things that we are charged with protecting actually recovering? And I would make a general recommendation that wherever possible, monitoring will continue to provide a really important foundation to understand the effect of management actions. And so this map that I put in front of you, this reflects a meta-analysis. abundance of native species, an increase in abundance. We see that a number of species that were extirpated turn up after that threatening process has been removed. And we know that a lot of these actions have genuine value and genuine benefit for other sectors. And so and there's an increasing push to understand the value that for many invasive species, they do interrupt sectors that are very important to people as it relates to rats interfering as a commensal rodent with food resources. We know that for some invasive species, for example, crab-eating macaques in Palau, they present a very real risk to the local economy because they prevent local communities from harvesting their own sustainable agriculture. And we see that, of course, removing invasive species allows increased resilience. The value of these terrestrial conservation actions on the marine environment. Several studies coming out of the Indian Ocean are showing that if you eradicate rats from islands and promote seabird return, that has genuine value for coral reef health and for local fish populations. By removing rats and restoring seabirds, you are restoring a nutrient cycling process that has value for both systems. These conservation actions of eradicating invasive mammals, they're a foundational exercise and they allow other restoration. A really blossoming area that's been going on for a couple of decades is seabird restoration, because they are the wanted ecosystem engineers that evolved with islands and often can restore a number of other processes that allow other species to flourish.
Lands and Seas World Heritage Site is located in South Indian Ocean, in the subantarctic area for the main islands. Is very linked with human settlements. In these islands, we have two main periods of human settlements. We have two big kinds of introduced species. Introduced mammals, it's mainly house mouse, black rat, and Norway rat. We have also some wild rabbits, cats, and reindeers in Kerguelen. He noted a strong reduction from 2006. That was the date of the creation of the nature reserve, because the World Heritage Site is based on a nature reserve. And we noted almost 20% decrease of invasive alien species in terms of introduced plants, because of several measures that we take. For example, we stopped cultivation and we carried out also specific eradication action that I will precise a little bit after. And it's a beginning also of the setting up of a biosecurity system. And this strategy in terms of fighting against invasive species is based on three key pillars. So eradication in pilot size, control and monitoring of impacted ecosystem, and the setting up and strengthening of biosecurity strategy. Some eradication success stories that we could realize. So for example, in Kerguelen Island, you see on these maps of different mouflon and sheep breeding. And that's a population were eradicated in 2020. And we have on this map projects that are under progress. So, for example, restriction of feral cat population in the east-north of Kerguelen. Operation not of eradication, but regulation of reindeers' geographic distribution. That you have in the main islands, and eradication of black rat eradication in Gulf Islands that we have. And the same objective that we have in Amsterdam and Sample Island. So as I mentioned, into the framework of the RECHI, the EU project, We have the ambition to have a combined eradication of every introduced mammal in this island. This is 55 square kilometer, Amsterdam Island. So Norway rat, house mouse, and feral cat.
Invasive species that are introduced by human activity have dramatic effects on the isolated ecosystems, and this can cause extinctions, and this is one of the things that we want to prevent. As you know, marine traffic worldwide is incrementing due to trade, tourism. The problems that we have here in the Galapagos is the amount of boats that visit the islands. We've got the cargo boats that bring all the goods to the islands, but we also have boats that sail around the world and visit the islands. That ballast water used to be one of the biggest vectors for the introduction of marine invasive species. Now we know that hull fouling is a bigger risk. So what we've done in Charles Darwin Foundation here in Galapagos is we wanted to assess the biofouling community of the ports here in the islands. And we teamed up with the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in the States and started using the methodology that they use in both coasts of the United States, Panama, and some sites in the Caribbean. And this methodology consists of using settlement plates, which are just small PVC plates with a weight that get deployed on floating docks around the islands. These plates are left for a period of time, and then they're collected and analyzed. Another thing we're doing is once we got like a baseline of the species in the ports, we wanted to know if these species have been dispersed throughout the islands. So we found that from the 53 introduced species that we found in ports, 23 have been now found in natural environments. And here we have a problem with an invasive algae, which is Caulerpa chemnitzia. It arrived in the islands and it's not competing with the corals right now, but it's growing next to the corals. And the problem with this is if the corals were to be bleached or affected by climate change, or this algae could grow over the affected corals and not allow them to recover. And these kind of things happening, what we've done is we've teamed up with the Ministry of Environment, the Galapagos National Park, and the Biosecurity Agency. Galapagos is one of the few places in the region and in the world that actually has an agency that is sole purpose is to control biosecurity and conduct quarantine. So all boats that enter the Galapagos are inspected by the Galapagos Biosecurity Agency technicians. As you can see in the photos, divers get in the water and inspect all the hulls. If the boat is found to have any biofouling on it, the National Park and the Ecuadorian Navy is in charge of asking the boat to leave and exit the marine reserve, clean the hull, and then re-enter for another inspection. We produced an action plan in 2015 to minimize the risk of marine invasive species being introduced. This has all been done in collaboration with the National Park, the Biosecurity Agency, and the Navy, and other partners. And this plan is not only for marine, but it's terrestrial as well. We know how marine invasions occur. We also know how to prevent marine invasions. The challenge is to not work alone. The challenge is to work together as a team and with all the countries, all the MPAs in the region,